Hello and welcome back. This is your Tuesday night episode of Getting Defensive, brought to you by GridironRatings.com. We are 2 nights away from the NFL draft, and yes, we will finally be talking about rookies with you guys here on this Tuesday version of Getting Defensive. Gary, the IDP tipster himself, is on special assignment tonight. Maybe he's scouting those rookies finally. We'll find out next week when he's back. But with me, James, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. I've been off on special assignment a few weeks in a row, so I'm glad to finally return and break all of my hot rookie news, all of my research and deep dives that I didn't do. I can bring to you right here today.
All right, then we're going to dive into that. But before we do that, we're going to have some news. And I also want to thank everyone who's watching or listening, whether it's in the podcast form or on YouTube Live. Thank you. And I'm sure you're already subscribed to Gridiron Ratings. But if not, make sure you hit that subscribe button, get the notifications turned on so you know whenever we go live, or you know when the Rider Dynasty show that JJ Winter has goes live. And I don't think they're doing a Thursday show this week against the draft, but they'll be back next week after the Tuesday show that we have, sort of recapping the draft as well. So again, before we get into sort of the meat of the show here about the draft, there are a couple sort of IDP things that may or may not be relevant. First one, I'm just going to tell you, I don't think it's a whole lot of relevant, but it's a big name, so it's worth mentioning. Earl Thomas, who's going to be 33 this year, wants to continue his playing career. He last played with the Ravens in 2019, and he did start all 15 games that he played in, but he had 49 combined tackles, 2 sacks, fumble recovery, and a forced fumble. That was, I guess he had a couple interceptions too, but really not much in terms of fantasy production. And we know where he would go, may play into that. But James, anything to see here at all in terms of Earl Thomas if he would be playing at 33?
I mean, in a vacuum prior to any sort of signing, no, absolutely not. No speculative ads that you need to make, even in your deepest of leagues. He's a 33-year-old guy who hasn't played for multiple years. And in his most recent actual on-field campaign, he was adequate. He was, it wasn't horrible, but he wasn't lighting up the world. And, time flies, especially when you're not on the field. So, no. Now, that said, if he lands somewhere, he lands nicely, and he seems to have some sort of path to mild playing time. Maybe there's some speculation, but that's exactly what it is. It's speculation, and you need to tie that to like actual tangible news. I could make an announcement right now saying, I'd like to return to my playing career, but it doesn't mean anything if a team doesn't want to actually bring me on. And that goes the same for Earl Thomas. It's been a while. I do remember he had a few reported in clubhouse issues and spats and whatnot. Now, of course, that could be classic NFL PR campaign when you let somebody go to just badmouth them on the way out because that's what happens in the league. But there's probably a little bit of truth behind that, as there usually is. But it's Earl Thomas. It's 2022. It's a nice little news piece as we head into the draft, and we're all just waiting for it. It's not actually any sort of actionable event in any size of league.
Sticking with the safeties, the other piece of real signing news, Terrell Edmunds re-signed with the Steelers for a 1-year deal. This will be his 5th year with the Steelers after being a first-round pick of theirs. He's sort of been all right, on and off. Tackle-wise, he does decent, 55, 71, 46, and 63 in terms of just solo tackles. He did have 89 and 105 were his high years for that, but he doesn't bring too much to the table more than just tackles, probably playing the same sort of role that he had with the Steelers in the past. Do you think that this is a position the Steelers are going to be looking to the future for, maybe in this draft, to find someone else? Because they don't really seem too enthusiastic about what they've gotten out of Edmunds so far with that 1-year prove-it deal.
Yeah, I mean, it's a position they could definitely address, but bringing him back suggests that they're maybe looking later in the draft to try and unearth the next Cameron Curl or whatnot, as opposed to drafting early and giving immediate playing time. I'm not an expert as to where the value is at the safety position in the draft, who looks like people who are going to walk in and be starters on day one. I do know last year there wasn't any starter who got drafted at any point from the safety position. So I'm assuming it's probably somewhere between the two, and there's, maybe a starter here or there. But do I think Pittsburgh's targeting that? No. But probably maybe at a depth piece. Maybe it'll even be a veteran free agent who hasn't signed yet. That's a possibility as well. But it's kind of the status quo over in Pittsburgh in terms of fantasy perspective. Edmonds is going to do what he's been doing. He's still on a one-year prove-it deal, which means he could leave next year, and he's kind of in the same position he was entering 2021, which is, we like him. He's young enough. There's potential if he lands in the right offense, but none of that has happened, and, it's just a repeat of the same thing, kind of like what they did with Juju, and that didn't really work out very well in Pittsburgh. So am I interested? Not really. I really don't want to play that waiting game where I have a guy who's got a decent enough floor but not a very high ceiling. So it's news. It's what's going on in the NFL transaction scape before the draft, but it's not very big fantasy news. It shouldn't be changing anyone's plan. If you already liked Edmonds, you still like him. If you didn't like him, you still don't like him, and that's kind of it.
Yeah, there's at least Tyrann Mathieu out there, though I don't know that he really fits as sort of that strong safety role for the Steelers. But other than that, off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you any other safeties out there. But maybe there is someone they're keeping an eye on. We know on the offensive side, there's a number of guys, Jarvis Landry, some other receivers and backup running backs, just waiting to see how things play out, which at this time of year, you might as well, because you don't want to sign somewhere thinking you're going to start and then just have your job taken by a rookie because of draft capital, which fortunately does happen from time to time for these guys.
Yeah, exactly. You've got the Andrew Sadejos and Devonte KZs and Matthias Fairleys of the world, all guys who, have a little bit of relevance, but all guys who aren't going to be taking Terrell Edmonds' job, or at least shouldn't be taking his job. So there's not really anything out there that's going to do anything other than muddy the waters in Pittsburgh, and that's from a draft perspective or from a free agent perspective. So it's just kind of wait and see, and you're going to expect nothing to happen, and if it does, you lose a little bit of value, but there's not a lot of value there to begin with. We kind of know this story. We know the big safety, and that's not Terrell Edmonds. That's Minkah Fitzpatrick, and, it is what it is.
All right. Well, we will transition into that rookie talk. We're sort of picking up where the Thursday show had left off. They had talked about the edge and the defensive backs, I believe, last week, when they're sort of talking about, good landing spots. If you had a top rookie go to one of these spots, where would you get excited about? We're going to throw some names out there too. We are not current rookie experts. We got some names to throw out there, probably the guys that you've seen for the most part in that first round. But beyond that, we're not doing an in-depth dive. From this show, we tend to say, one, fade rookies a little bit to begin with, but two, certainly don't go investing until you know landing spot. So we will be starting off here with interior defensive linemen. So for the most part, this is defensive tackles. And James, I'm just going to go to you. I know, we had a few listed beforehand, and maybe you'll have some surprises for me, but what is one spot that you're really sort of paying attention to if you're in a defensive tackle player specific league, because they'll have more relevance there, but where one of these top guys like a Jordan Davis, Devonte Wyatt, if they go there, you might have some interest in looking at him as a rookie.
Yeah, there's two top spots currently on my board, so to speak, in where I want to see high draft capital go and get invested on an interior defensive lineman if I'm looking to invest in an interior defensive lineman. And that'd be Las Vegas and that'd be Cleveland. Two spots that I don't think are necessarily surprises for anyone who's kind of paying attention, but Las Vegas really has me excited as to what can happen. Right now they've got Below Nichols, and he's a nice piece. He's going to do totally fine as an adequate guy in the middle, but he's not necessarily someone who you want to have play every snap in the center. And secondarily, you could definitely draft someone high and just pair him with those outside edge rushers who just really, frankly, look amazing today. I know we're looking at things on paper and we haven't seen the field, but I like Max Crosby and Chandler Jones as a combination. Those things look really nice, especially from getting interior defensive lineman statistics, which are mainly volume-based tackles. I think that those guys are going to do great jobs of also supporting and getting interior sacks. And essentially, I'm just situationally looking and going, this looks nice. There's a chance to add someone. There's not really anyone in the way if you invest early. So I really love it. And the same can be said for Cleveland. Cleveland doesn't have much in the way of really anyone inside on the interior. They got Taven Bryant, they got Tommy Doligoli, Jordan Elliott. I know they just brought in Sheldon Day, but again, no one who we're interested in saying, oh, this guy's going to eat a lot of snaps. This guy's going to be there. He's going to do his thing. Whereas that rest of that Cleveland team and Cleveland defense especially, they're all kind of set. Maybe the inside linebacker, which I'll probably address shortly, they can use a piece, but otherwise that they're pretty good and they just have a lot of depth. And I think, these are my two landing spots where I go, oh, I would really like to see something happen here. And if they do, I'm interested. Of course, that said, there's the same caveat as there always is, which betting on interior linemen to grow and become good on the fantasy game, not usually the greatest bet. Secondarily, doing that with rookies, also not a very good bet. But if that's what we're doing and it's the topic that we have, these are the two landing spots that I'm interested in and will pique my ears the most relative to anywhere else.
Yeah, really interesting about those two spots is, neither one of those teams probably is going to invest anything high in terms of a pick, because you look at Cleveland, I think their first pick there's 44, of course, because, their first was shipped out for Deshaun Watson. And when you're looking at the Vegas, I think their first pick currently is a third rounder because they shipped their first and second to the Packers for Devonte Adams. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what those teams do at all, if they just stand pat or if they try to make a move up somewhere if a guy that they like falls. Neither one of the top two, Jordan Davis and Devonte Wyatt, so they're very different defensive tackles. Jordan Davis, of course, that mountain of a man, that athletic specimen that just, took the combine by storm in the hearts of Twitter. But right now, he's probably more of like a two-down guy. He isn't as refined as a pass rusher, whereas Devonte Wyatt, if he didn't have some off-the-field issues, there's a good chance he could probably be a top 10 pick himself, because he's sort of more that do-it-all defensive tackle. You could play him at end, too, if he had a situation where you maybe have bigger guys on the inside and you want to shift him outside. He could more play across the defensive front. But with those off-the-field issues, teams generally have been shying away more from those high first-round picks, because if you invest in it and then they bust for something like that you kind of were aware of, it looks even worse. So probably both first-round picks, or at the very least, a high second-round pick. So neither one of those two will probably go to these teams unless they make a move. Some other teams here that we just mentioned. So the Ravens, they do need defensive line help just because they're aging, but at the same time, they play more of that 3-4, and there's even usually less production out of that. You can have a guy like Calais Campbell, who they did resign, who can, really find their niche and do well, or Casey Hayward is another one. But those guys are few and far between. It's just harder to get production out of that 3-4 front with your defensive linemen. So it'll be interesting to see which one of these teams actually take the dive, because there isn't a lot of top-end depth at this position.
Yeah, you kind of hit the nail, right on the head, as I always like to say. There's nothing in this draft, again, I'm not an expert. I haven't been studying the film as many others do, but based on what others have said, there's nothing that suggests that there's any sort of difference maker here. There's any sort of potential Aaron Donald who's going to show up in year one. Obviously, they could, but, when you're looking at interior D-line, you're looking for floor, because the ceiling is so low. Outside of the Aaron Donalds and, the DeForest Buckner, there's not a very high ceiling with anyone. So, if you hit the lottery tickets on those guys, congrats, you did well. But for the most part, you're just looking to get guys who eat volume, can supplant a few sacks because the edge rushers outside look nice for them and, take a lot of attention. But there's a whole lot of kind of the same guy. And when it comes to rookies, those guys might not have playing time, so they're even a lot further down my board. And generally, my recommendation is don't really pay any attention here. If you're in that deep, deep dynasty league and, you're starting two of them because you're starting a full 11 defense, so be it. You can draft based off of capital and just go with it, but you're not expecting to get any sort of production in year one that you can reliably count on. Some spot games here and there, some nice matchup plays, but nothing where you're going to set it and forget it, like you can get on the interior linebacker position.
Yeah, and you made a great point about playing time. Most of these rookies, if you're not taking the first second round, probably you won't have that shot at immediate playing time. You're going to have to work your way up past a veteran. And even then, for the defensive linemen especially, they aren't out there for a huge percentage of the snaps to begin with, just because of the nature of the position, how physical it is. And, you want to keep these guys healthy over the course of this longer season. So we've seen this last year, a lot bigger rotations. When you throw all of that together, it just doesn't give you a whole lot of hope for year one immediate playing time and then production for these defensive tackles when, again, there really isn't that top name we're expecting to be out there for 3 downs making killer production, even if they go to a perfect situation, which I think in some ways it's good for us because it's kind of what were talking about and preaching, for the past year. Rookies will disappoint you more often than they're going to explode and make you look really smart. You're going to be much better off trying to pick up a Jordan Davis, Devonte Wyatt, or Travis Jones if he's taken in the second round after year one when their owner is probably a little bit down on them.
Yeah, exactly. And it's always a good time to remember that this position, kind of like cornerback, it's very matchup dependent and it's very, team and context dependent. You don't have just talent shine through here like you do at, say, the quarterback position. There might be guys who are elite and command double teams every snap, like Aaron Donald, but there's that guy that there's nobody else. There's not, multiple people in a draft class who they're going to produce. Why? Because they're so good. That's not how the interior defensive line works. It's a position where you got to gnaw and scrap for everything, both on the field and on the fantasy field, because there's not a lot of just immediate production here. So, I can't stress it enough. You can look at situations and go, yes, I like this, but that's about it. I also like Denver in addition to Baltimore as a nice landing spot. Like Kraig mentioned, Pittsburgh's a solid landing spot as well. Yeah, Casey Hayward's there, but once he's gone, there's a huge production, a huge void to fill. So I like that. The Bears, don't really have anyone there currently, so that's a nice little landing spot as well. Same with Seattle and Houston and Detroit. Those are all just kind of, waiting to get filled. So if someone invests early in those guys, it's an interesting investment. But that's all it is it's interesting. It's not extremely actionable. And especially in any sort of redraft leagues, you don't need to worry with yourself about any rookie until they actually perform. But in those dynasty leagues, you can pay attention. You can work here, but you got to know your settings because in your average league, it still doesn't even matter.
And with that, I think we've talked about those interior defensive linemen for about all as useful as it's going to be pre-draft. But I do want to throw out a plug there. If you go over to gridironratings.com and you do get a subscription, you can now get access to the rookie draft guide with the information beforehand. We do want to give you a bit of a sneak peek here. So I'm going to share with you, and of course, we're going to share with the IDP information that we have here. This is going to be a bit of a look ahead of time. So again, this will change probably a bit afterwards, but you're going to be able to see defensive linemen. Now that does include some edge players as well. You're going to see names duplicated. But the defensive line, linebackers, defensive backs, edge, and we're not going to show you, what all the different ratings and all that mean, but each player is going to have their own little page. You're going to find their pros, cons, similar players, all that good information that everyone has put together for you. It's a great deal. It's a really useful tool. Again, sort of like these shows, we're not going to be making decisions for you. We're just out here trying to give you the best information that we can. So make sure you go over to gridironratings.com and get that subscription so you have access to that rookie draft guide. And there's, of course, offense over here. We don't want to talk about that even with Gary gone. We don't want Dirty O taking over his show. But you got the IDP, then the table of contents, defensive line, linebacker, defensive backs. So make sure you go check that out.
Yeah, and I'll say that this, whole guide, it's amazing. And I'll say I haven't contributed much of anything yet because I don't like to contribute until after those landing spots happen. But if you want to get that information, if you want to dive deep, there's no real better place to go than to this draft guide because it's extremely comprehensive. All of our main college guys are just diving in and putting all of their information in it. And it's really just an excellent resource, especially if you're looking to get that advantage early. If you're like me and you want to wait a little bit, so be it, go right ahead. But if you don't, there is so much information. So definitely go ahead and grab that if that's something you're interested in.
All right. Well, we're going to get that off the screen. We don't want people to get all the juicy information without paying for it, but you got a teaser for it tonight. And we're going to move to the sort of inside linebacker spot. So this is really not counting the edge type of guys, since they went over those. Edge type guys, of course, are sort of your 4-3 defensive ends and 3-4 outside linebackers, as there's a lot of flexibility between those players and positions these days. But, we're talking more here about sort of a Roquan Smith, a Darius Leonard, those type of guys. If you think other teams, maybe a team we'll talk about here, but the Denver Broncos, they have those two guys inside with their two edge guys, would look like Bradley Chubb and Randy Gregory, who's going to be on the inside for them. So top rookies here. Now, of course, this is the season of disinformation, so who really knows? But there's probably only at most two that are going to go round one. They are different types, Devin Lloyd and then Nakobe Dean. Lloyd is from Utah. Nakobe Dean is from Georgia. And if you caught a glimpse of it, you saw that the number one that the Gridiron Ratings crew has for linebacker ranking here is Nakobe Dean. So with that said, James, what sort of spots team-wise are you looking for to say, hey, maybe that perfect sort of situation that doesn't always pan out, we've seen with other classes, but if we go back and imagine that, there hadn't been the Troy Reader and all that, and Ernest Jones goes there, that spot that you sort of gravitate to thinking, all right, this is something to watch here for how the preseason plays out.
Yeah, I'm already locked in. Whoever goes to Seattle is going to be my high investment. I'd also think that I'm probably not in the minority there. A lot of people are going to be interested in who takes over that second linebacker position now that Bobby Wagner's gone. You still have that same Pete Carroll type of defense, which means you're still going to see a lot of volume there. But I suspect there's going to be my new Ernest Jones, a third, fourth round pick, a guy who's got a lot of upside, who's probably not going to start immediately, but come the end of the season might have a ton of value, so long as Bobby Wagner doesn't replace him. So I like that Seattle pick, whoever it is, whenever it is, so long as it's top 5 rounds, and I fully expect it to happen. I'm not an expert, so of course my mock in my head where I say they're going to take a linebacker doesn't necessarily have to happen. But if it does, that's what I'm locked in and targeted on. I think that's just a great place to attack. And frankly, I don't care who it is, because whoever it is, they have an ample amount of opportunity that frankly is kind of unparalleled at the position.
So I want to throw an interesting one at you. As a Cowboys fan, of course, I have to bring it back to myself to keep up with the consensus view of what Cowboys fans are like. If they draft a guy early, let's say for some reason they take one first round again or second round, and someone that's clear going to be a starter, with how they used Micah Parsons last year, knowing that Leighton Vander Esch is on a 1-year deal, they have, I think, a third round pick from last year, Jabril Cox, who's more of a coverage type guy himself. Would a sort of throwback type of linebacker like Nakobe Dean or someone like that have interest from you from an IDP perspective?
Yeah, I mean, there definitely would be interest. Probably I won't be the person who's the most interested in him in a IDP setting in any sort of draft, whether it's redraft or dynasty. To me, it'll be kind of too many cooks in the kitchen. Obviously, Parsons going to get his, even if they move him outside, like I suspect they might. And of course, Vander Esch, he's on that 1-year deal, so he might be long gone come 365 days from now. But that's still 365 days away. And, Cox, if he's a good coverage guy, well, that's going to see a lot of the playing field. Not necessarily a lot of my fantasy stats, but, teams want to keep linebackers who can cover in the game because we all know it's a passing league. So you add those 3 up and then you take another first or second round guy, and it just feels like too much. It feels almost kind of like an Arizona situation last year where, Collins came in and, he's going to be a stud. We invested in him. But at the same time, where's he getting his immediate playing time? I'm not so sure. So, they went ahead and they cut, Jalen Smith last year. So there could be a Leighton Vander Esch cut if that happens. But from a pure speculation standpoint, I don't think I'm going to be the one who falls in love here. Just like last year, I loved Jamin Davis's profile. I loved him going to Washington. I thought things looked great. But I was never the one most in love with him. Someone else always went ahead and grabbed him. And at a certain point, you got to sit back and go, hey, not right now. And that's what I assume would happen in that scenario where I'd look at Dallas and go, I'm not going to be the guy paying here. I'll take the boring, savvy, not so nice veteran over this high upside guy when I can just find upside later in the season.
So I'm going to throw two other teams at you here, and I'm going to let you take your pick of which one you'd prefer if, let's say, even a first-round linebacker went to him, because I'm going to throw the Detroit Lions at you. They have that, I think it's the last pick of the first round, so certainly if one fell there, they would have interest in it because of the mess they currently have at linebacker. Sorry, Gary. And the other one would be the Philadelphia Eagles, who have a couple first-round picks, and sort of right in that middle of the draft where they're thinking these guys might go. Now, I know Philadelphia has not historically done this. They're not really high on taking a linebacker early, but if they were to with that linebacker room, which of those two situations would excite you more?
I mean, between the two, Detroit excites me more long term. Philly definitely excites me more short term. Right now, Philly's got Kaiser White, they got TJ Edwards, and they don't really have anything else. And if they invest in a first round linebacker, I'm fully expecting that first round linebacker to take one of those guys' positions, likely, probably TJ Edwards. Maybe they take White, but I don't expect that person to be sitting and waiting and learning and taking their time. So whoever that may be, I'd expect them to get on the field, hit the ground running, and things look good. Now over in Detroit, it's a little more muddled. You've got Alex Anzalone, you got Jared Davis, you got Derek Barnes, you got Josh Woods. None of those guys are really people we love right now, even though Gary's not here and he can say that he loves Jared Davis. So I'll just plug that for him, even though he's not at the podcast. But I think that Detroit defense could produce an excellent linebacker if they decide to invest in one. Now, if I'm a fan of either of these two teams, I don't want a linebacker in the first round. I want to go and address, bigger, more pressing needs. It's weird to say that we live in a world, because it wasn't this way when I grew up, but linebacker, especially on the inside, is a luxury position. You can plug and fill and just let a guy go volume those tackles up, and you can be fine, especially if you're a losing team like Philadelphia and Detroit have been for the past few seasons. And you don't need to invest there when you have other holes that you need to fill. So it's kind of a catch-22. If either one of these teams invested, I'd be very interested because it's very outside of their modus operandi. And I go, whoa, this is a new MO. You must really love and want to commit to this player. So I'm interested. But if they take a third or a fourth round or a fifth round guy, he's just going to have to crack that ceiling, crack through those Josh Woods on the roster, crack through the Alex Anzalones, and maybe he gets 2 weeks and then he falls back behind them, and it's just going to be, another name on that chart. So it's an interesting question. Definitely Detroit more long-term because I think they can sustain an elite linebacker more so than Philly can at this date, but they're both nice and they're both kind of the same in their own ways.
Yeah, I think the second, third round is probably going to be the sweet spot for rookies for the inside linebacker position here, because there really, again, aren't those huge surefire first round pick names. I mean, both of Lloyd and Dean, you've seen people talking about how they could fall out of the first, which is very different how things used to be, to your point. There used to be those stud linebackers that went early, and even if you go back a couple of years with both of the Devins going in the top 15, one of them worked out. The other one, it remains to be seen how Devin Bush still handles everything. He's still young and has a chance to turn it around. But teams really are turning away from that. So if you sort of look at in the second round, third round here, just in the second round, you have the Jets with 2 picks early on, 35, 38. Got Seattle at 40 and 41, who you had mentioned. Detroit's got 34 right after having 32. Go farther down in there. There's a lot of teams that really seem to have things set, but there's New Orleans, Philadelphia at 51. So I really do think that's where the value is going to be seen. But as we talked about, I think it was 2 weeks ago now, if you look at the linebackers that have produced by and large, going back 5-6 years, there's really been 2 linebackers, 2 to 3 each year in the top 3 rounds that are drafted that have that immediate starting impact. And boy, good luck trying to figure out who it is going to be each year, because even just going back this last year, there were like 3 or 4 inside linebackers taken. Parsons was one of them. And then you have to go to the third round, and Nick Bolton, I think, towards the end of the third round to find the other guy. And pretty much the whole draft that had a consistent payout for you. So, man, it's going to be a lot of excitement, especially if your team takes one of them. And if it's the guy that you like, hold your horses. Don't overdraft him, because as James has told you again for the past year, you're going to get burned more likely than you are going to get that high-end production.
Yeah, if there's anything that I can preach, it's college football is an excellent sport, but the way it transitions to the National Football League, it doesn't. I love my minor league baseball, I love my Atlantic League baseball, but guys who light up those leagues aren't going to light up the major leagues more often than not. And the people who do light up the major leagues may have not done so well there. It's all about progressing in development and team development. And that's why I'm a humongous preacher of situational context, looking at how teams use players and focusing on that. And I'm not at all a preacher of, well, the cream rises to the top because, players go and someone is at the top. They always are. And we say, oh, well, his talent got him there. And I go, no, he's very talented. But if he had landed in a different location, he might not be at the top. Why? Because situation matters. And it's hard to just quantify what the situation is. We can look at all of the deep stats and we can all look at all the snap counts and whatever deeper version we want to look at. But situation is what matters, and we can't really quantify it. That's why it's so much speculation. It's why this game exists, because if we could quantify it, we just figure out who's good, and that's that. And it's not how the game works. But if there's anything I can stress, it's that rookies don't pay off when you invest early and you need production early. You can invest and wait, go right ahead and do that. But if you can't wait, you're making a losing bet relative to your alternate options.
Yeah, and if you're just starting out in IDP, something that I think might be useful. So, especially if you're really into college and you know who a lot of these people are, maybe draft prep is really your thing and you're diving into IDP. Make a list, at Excel, or if you do it by hand, whatever. Have the guys that you really like in one area, and another put those landing spots that you think would work out really well. And just, fill out to cross and compare, who goes to what spot, see if any of them fill up on both sides. But then also really pay attention to those guys that maybe you hadn't thought of that go to those really good situations and try to see where are these guys going in drafts. Because if a guy goes to the Eagles in the third round, a guy goes to Denver in the third round, you're probably not going to be paying a premium to get those guys. And if you can get them later in the draft and stash them, that's where you have a better shot of finding valuable gold, as opposed to the gold that you got to pay 3 times the normal price for in the first round because, so-and-so went picking 10 overall. If a guy goes 10 overall to, say, the Giants, probably not going to be the best situation in a defense that it's going to have some issues, and offense that'll probably have issues. And then you got Blake Martinez right there. So long term, yeah, maybe a great spot. But that year one production, probably, coming out and just blowing your doors off, again, unlikely. Whereas if you could get a guy in the third round that the second half of the season he starts for Philadelphia and gets that production by default, you got a better chance of winning your league that way. So keep an eye out on where people go and don't just, stay in love with the guy that you fell in love with beforehand.
Yeah, and to preach to that point, you also have to remember who coaching staff's like. You may love a guy, you may have fallen in love with him, you may think he's great, and when he gets drafted by Detroit, you go, he should blow right past Alex Anzalone. Anzalone's just another guy. Whoever this is who got drafted, I love him. He's going to be a star. And while maybe you think that, it doesn't matter what you think. Doesn't matter what I think. Doesn't matter what Kraig thinks. It even doesn't matter what Gary thinks. What actually matters is what those NFL coaching staffs thinks. So if they like Alex Anzalone, they want to give him that nice little dot. They want him to call these plays. And sure, his high-end production is not equal to this rookie they just drafted, and they'd agree with that. But what they don't agree with is giving all that volume and all that productivity immediately to that rookie because he's not ready. So even though you see it and you see that potential future value, you need to wait. And waiting in the fantasy game is not necessarily a great result. Someone can go and invest in Calvin Ridley today, and you have to wait. You're not getting any stats. You're not going to do anything with him. And do you really want to invest at him at a premium? No. At a cheap price, absolutely. That goes the same for rookies, especially on that interior defensive line side and, on the interior linebacker side. You can invest in these guys at a cheap price, go right ahead. If you need to pay that high-end gold price, no, not so much, as Kraig said. You want to maybe hoard late-round picks because you'll, throw 12 darts at the board. One of them's going to probably get there. If you invest in 3 high-round picks, is your ceiling higher? Yes. But is your likelihood of hitting that much higher? Not so much. So it's all about context. It's all about just understanding that, the hype that comes with the rookies, it's not that it's unjustified, it's that it takes time. And time is something that we don't have a lot of in fantasy football. You play the season, you got 16, 17 games, and that's it. You don't have anything else. So if it takes 20 games for a guy to get up to speed, that's way too long for you to sit and wait on that roster spot. So you want to be able to cycle guys in leagues where you can do this. Obviously, the deepest of leagues where you have everyone rostered, that's a different story. But by and large, to our general new IDP listener, you kind of want to not be the person who overinvests in rookies because, yeah, you could hit the lottery ticket and you can do great. But if you hit the lottery ticket on Micah Parsons last year, you also drafted Pete Warner, you also drafted JOK, what did you do? What did you miss out on where you could have taken someone else with that production and that value, even though you hit, let alone if you bust?
Yeah, podcast I was listening to, I think it had Mel Kiper, Todd McShay, and Field Yates on, where they were just talking about the draft in general and their thoughts. And I'm not going into that at all, but they made the comment that it is a game of volume when you talk about the draft, the real life draft. The more of those dart throws or lottery tickets that you have, the better chance you have, assuming you have a good scouting department, of course, of finding someone that's going to be of any value. In fantasy football, it's the same way. We're sitting here, second guessing and trying to figure out, all right, what are these teams that have these enormous scouting departments? What did they get wrong and what did they get right? Well, if we're guessing about their guessing, yeah, maybe we have educated opinions because we studied the players ahead of time in college and read up on everything that we could, but it still is ultimately guessing. So you want more chances, especially for these things where we're not going to usually see a lot of immediate production. So I really like that idea that you have of, invest late across multiple positions instead of trying to do that early. Use that for those premium positions like quarterback if you're in super flex, running back, wide receiver, where we probably have a little bit better of a handle of who's going to see what sort of production as opposed to linebacker or, God forbid, cornerback or safety or something like that, where it's just become such a crapshoot on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, and if you want to segue to a little bit of just team construction and roster building for people, this is where I always say, the draft's coming up. People are going, I'm going to like this sleeper, whoever it may be, who shows up in this draft, who lands nicely, but maybe didn't have a lot of draft capital, or who someone loves, but didn't get a lot of draft capital, or someone who got a lot of draft capital and we didn't expect it. Someone is going to become the hot name in your league or in multiple leagues, and, you can invest in that guy and you can play the wait and see approach. Or you can trade that guy, go and invest in a veteran who is likely to bust soon, say a Melvin Gordon type. If we want to compare to running backs, dare I bring up Dirty O? I'm so sorry, Gary. But those kind of guys are guys you want to invest in. Go grab DeMario Davis. Why? Sure, he's not going to last very long, and he's going to retire in a year or two, or maybe 3, knowing him. But he's going to give you production now, and you know what you have in a year or 2 or 3? More draft picks where you can draft the same type of player. It's not as if one draft class has these guys who show up with this draft capital that you weren't expecting, or draft capital below what you were expecting, or whatever it may be. That happens every draft class. So what you can do is you can go buy a lottery ticket that's going to expire soon, and whether you hit or you don't hit on DeMario Davis, maybe this is finally the year where he takes a full step back and a seat away from the table, and you have new rookies come in. But if he does, you just move on from him, just like you'd move on from that 6th-round rookie that didn't land. It's the same type of draft ticket. It just doesn't have the very long reward, and that's what people generally go, well, I don't want that. I want to take a guy, and I want to, miraculously hit on the next superstar, and I can have him for the next 10, 15 years. Well, if you do that, you didn't do that through skill. And it took you a lot of failing in order to succeed there, whereas you can just go and grab these old, forgettable veterans that people don't want, and you can build a pretty decent roster out of them. And it's about building winning football teams on paper for your fantasy squad. I know some people might disagree with that, and if you do, that's fine. Please join my league. But you want to put teams together that get stats. The age of the players doesn't actually matter. You just care about their future stats. So if they just keep producing, even if they're old, it doesn't matter. And if they fail and you can replace them with someone young, it's the same difference. It's, people get attached to names, and especially during rookie season, you don't want to get attached to names. You want to get attached to stat lines.
Yeah, and I think it I think that's another great point. Like you've had all show, it is easier to, not throw away the player, but just the value that they bring to your fantasy team because you're not actually doing anything to the real player. Of course, this is all just done on ones and zeros on the computers for us. If you're not heavily invested in a player, it's going to be a lot easier just to cut bait with them if nothing happens. And when you can get these guys that are going to give you that value as a veteran, you know what you're getting much cheaper, whether it's a late pick that you trade to someone or, free off of the waiver wire. If you trade your picks away, you know what you're getting with them. It's a cheap investment and you're not attached to them. It's easier to churn through those guys and find the ones that you want to keep for that season or a season or two than that rookie that you invested, second round pick that you were so excited to make and you're sitting there waiting for him and nothing happens. And you get trade offers coming in, but you don't want to let go of them because you really liked them. And something could happen where you could get value. 3 seasons in, you have that same feeling. I really like that approach, and that isn't something I honestly have done a whole lot in fantasy. I still love drafting. I think that's part of the reason I always did a lot of mock drafts beforehand. Is it just it's so fun to plug these players in and think about what would happen, and it's always just a little bit disappointing when you get to the regular season. It's like, all these guys that I loved, they're on the bench or they're getting 25% playing time, and what am I doing with this team? So I think there are teams, and I've been guilty of it in some leagues, that just fall in love with the draft and drafting and then rebuilding. And they're like, oh man, I want to get this perfect team of amazing young players. How often does it really happen? And how long does it take you to do that? I mean, you could spend 9-10 years. Great, you got the perfect young team now. Well, you're not going to win the league every year. And how many years of money did you waste, trying to build that team while you're waiting around? It's a great point.
Exactly. And, the best team in a league every year, how likely is that to actually win your championship? Go back and look at all of your teams from last season and the season before and the season before. Who had the best team and who won the championship? It's not about acquiring the best team. It's about winning the championship. And if you win it with the worst team, so be it. And, to kind of speak to your whole draft proposition and how fun they are, I agree with you completely. I used to draft and then have too many teams, and most of them were free leagues. And I just said, I have too many teams, and I would try and sort through them, and it became kind of a pain. But what I learned, probably the best thing I learned, would be there'd be a few drafts that I'd forget about, and I wouldn't go to, and I would miss them, and I would get out of draft. And I'm a completionist at heart, so I'd still try and fix these teams even though they're in free leagues and maybe I just shouldn't have cared. And I learned how much faster. I'll just cut bait with somebody. I go, oh, you're not producing. It's week 2. Goodbye, because I don't care about you. You're not one of my guys. And sometimes them not being one of my guys would maybe come back to bite me, and I let go of somebody a little bit too early. But far more often, I went and added somebody at the right time before somebody else got them, and that guy became a valuable piece to my roster. And not getting attached to that name, admitting, this guy who I thought was a sleeper immediately isn't, and letting go of him can be a winning move. And if you're always stuck in that rut week 3 and week 4 with these guys on your roster who you necessarily don't think are going to produce, but you also said, I think they were going to produce 4 weeks ago, well, you dug a hole for yourself by getting attached to someone. Now, if you want to get attached and you want to draft your favorite players from your favorite team, go right ahead and do that. I always advocate you want to have fun and you want to do the things that are the most fun for you. And if that's it, so be it and do it. But by and large, most people have fun via winning. And the most winning strategy is to be able to let go of people when they're not producing, to add people who are. You're trying to accrue stats. You're not trying to accrue names. And, like I said in my last little diatribe 5 minutes ago, you just want to get stats that win you a league. And that should be your focus, and learning to kind of have that separation from a player is good if you want to care and try and win in fantasy football. It's odd to say because we all love football so much, but you got to have that step of separation and admit, hey, sometimes it's time to move on.
Yeah, and it kind of turned into the whole crapping on the rookies here to end the show, but that's sort of the vibe that we have here on this Tuesday show. Again, the draft is wonderful. I equate it to Christmas for myself now that I'm an adult. I like seeing Christmas with my kids and the joy that they have and all that, but it really isn't the same. And just seeing where all these players go, and finally we have something we can dig into more so than just the speculation of, if they go here, then what might happen when there's how many different permutations of that possible. So rookies are great. It's fun to see what happens in the draft and in real life. But for your fantasy team, pump the brakes on the rookies. And I think that just needs to be repeated, and I'm sure we'll continue to repeat it here as the rest of the year goes on. But James, as we're wrapping up here, any final thoughts on just other than the crapping on the rookies that we've done on the draft coming up? Anything you're excited for or looking forward to?
Yeah, I feel like I'm always crapping on the rookies, but I really am not. I'm just realistic with the rookies, which sounds like crapping relative to all the other hype that they get.
Yep.
But there's going to be somebody who gets, drafted by the Denver Broncos on that interior D line, and I go, I kind of like him, even though no one else is really hyping him up because he's a 5th-round guy, and I go, he could play his way into playing time. Or someone goes to the Baltimore Ravens at inside linebacker, and I go, yeah, they brought back Josh Bynes. Yeah, Patrick Queen's supposedly back in there, but you never know. Maybe this guy's interesting. And all these guys I'm going to be interested in, they're going to be low-value guys. So you can go in, you can draft them very late, and if you bust, you wasted a pick that's not super valuable, and it's all okay. But I like plenty of rookies, and ultimately, I play this game the way I want to play it. You should play this game the way you want to play it. So if you want to get hype, we have plenty of production within the Gridiron Ratings whole family for you to go get hyped over your rookies. For me, I just want information. So give me that landing spot. Now I can know exactly where I like somebody. Give me that draft capital. Now I can decide what their value is, and I can move from there. And, hopefully, if you're like me, you're just hyped for football. Football is coming. I know it's only April 26th, and we're still a ways away from tangible football. And we've got things like these spring leagues and these fan-led football leagues that we're trying to fill that void and really just don't do it, although maybe, over the course of 5 or 10 years they do. But ultimately, just take a step back, enjoy the 3 days of the draft, enjoy all of these names being read that matter so much to you, even though it's just names being read and you still haven't seen any action, and just enjoy things. Just be happy, enjoy them. I like to say that I always try and enjoy things, and even though I might be trashing somebody, I'm enjoying myself doing it.
And remember, we will be with you here all throughout the offseason to, once we dig into it a bit, let you know, of course, our immediate reaction start of next week, Tuesday. But then we'll be digging into some of those late round guys too, letting you know, although maybe you'll let us know too, the guys that you're thinking of that could, hey, late round pick here, decent situation, write them down somewhere. You'll be paying attention to what happens in training camp, because a whole glut of information will be coming out through the draft, but then there's a lot to play out through rookie camps, training camps. Injuries are going to happen. Veteran signings is just another big piece to the puzzle, but the puzzle will not be anything close to finish. So make sure you stay here at gridironratings.com and getting defensive on Tuesday and Thursday for all those defensive needs. I want to thank you all for watching with us this long, listening to us wherever you are. You can find James on Twitter at WhatMoney3000. I'm at RotoHeatCraig. And of course, Gary, who's probably mad that we talked about offense at all, he's at the IDP Tipster. Please let us know if you have any questions, need anything from us. And for everyone here, have a good night, and we will see you back in a week.